My name is Fedor Sazanovac. I'm a senior software engineer. I'm also an author of multiple technical books, some coding courses, and I'm also a coding coach. At one point in my career, I had to learn design patterns, and I found them very difficult to learn. So I gave up learning them, and that was until the point when I failed a technical interview for a company that I really wanted to work for, because I didn't know some of the design patterns. So after this failure, I went back to learning them, and I had to brute force my way through them because they were so difficult to learn. Eventually I learned them, and after being familiar with them, I realized how important they are. They have indeed helped me to solve many problems that I've faced in my career. Design patterns have been designed, after all, to solve some common problems, to provide standard solutions to them so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But the biggest challenge with the design patterns has to do with the way how they are normally taught. Normally, if you go to any resource that teaches design patterns, it will show you the structure of each of the design patterns. But that structure will not make much sense unless you know the context. Without the context being provided first, it will look like the code has been just overcomplicated for no reason. So, to make the things easier for any new developers who are just starting to learn design patterns, I have written 2 books on them. One for .NET developers and another one for those who are using JavaScript. And now I have also published a course which is called The Easiest Way to Learn Design Patterns. The philosophy and training methods in the books and in the course are the same. Essentially, you are not shown the design patterns right away. First, you get familiar with the context. We start by introducing you to the problems that you can easily relate to. Those are normal problems that developers face, so any developer can relate to those problems easily. Then, for each of the problems, which represent common real-life scenarios, you are provided a list of design patterns that you can use to solve that problem. And you are provided a brief overview of each of the design patterns. And only then, only once you get yourself familiar with all the problems, we then delve deep into each of the design patterns. And by that time, when you actually have a look at the structure of each of these patterns, because you know the context, this structure will make sense to you. Because the process of learning is not about memorizing new information. Effective learning is about building associations between the knowledge that you already have and some new facts. And that is the principle that drives this course and the books that I have written. So why are design patterns so important for software developers to know, and why I've decided to create a course for them? They will make you an effective programmer because design patterns provide standard solutions to standard problems. They will help you to solve problems much quicker because you don't have to think about the solutions. Once you are familiar with design patterns and the problems that they are trying to solve, you will immediately identify which design pattern can solve a particular problem and just apply that. They will keep your code maintainable because design patterns have been structured in such a way that the principles of clean code are followed. And from a purely pragmatic perspective, they will help you to enhance your career. A lot of companies ask about design patterns during technical interviews, or they provide you with the problems that you will only be able to solve properly if you apply design patterns. If you don't know design patterns, you won't be able to pass those technical interviews. And based on my own experience, a lot of reputable IT companies do this. But the problem with design patterns is that they are really hard to learn. But there are some reasons for that. And one of the major reasons for this is that the structure of the design patterns is often provided without sufficient context. Essentially, as a new developer who has never used design patterns before, you just have a look at some code, which looks too complicated and you don't know what this code does. And this is all because design patterns are not really intuitive in their structure. But this course aims to do things differently. It provides relatable context first, before it delves deeper into design pattern structure. First, you get introduced to problems that you can easily relate to, that you will often see as software developers in real-life situations. Only then, after briefly describing what design patterns solve each problem, you will show implementation examples of each of the patterns. And this makes design patterns easier to learn by associations. First of all, you can easily understand relatable problems when they are described to you. You can easily see how each design pattern can solve this particular problem when it's briefly described to you, after the problem itself is described. And then, when you know the basics, you are ready to expand your knowledge and learn the details of each design pattern. Also, in this course, we don't overload you with information. All examples that are provided use vanilla implementation of .NET. We don't use any external libraries in the examples until it's absolutely necessary to make a point. And you aren't shown dozens of examples for each of the pattern. Each of the example is simple enough to understand, but complex enough to serve as an example of a design pattern implementation. The course will consist of the following parts. First, you will get familiar with solid principles. Because design patterns are based on solid principles, it makes sense to learn them first. There are only 5, and you will learn them by refactoring the same application. Then we will talk about the scenarios where design patterns can be applied. For each of the scenarios, we will list the suitable design patterns, and for each of those, we will provide a brief description of how this design pattern can solve this problem. And then finally, in part 3, we will take you through all design patterns in detail. We will have a look at some code implementations written in C#